it's it's just human nature. I mean, that's sort of what it comes down to, is that our survival as humans is dependent on existing with other people. We rely on them for emotional needs, actual needs, right? Food, housing, right? We exist in communities. Having a conflict threatens that connection. And so I think that just at a very basic human level, we are hardwired for likability, right? Because that's how we survive. You add on to that this layer of sort of how conflict is thought of in society. And it varies, of course, from culture to culture. Some cultures are more comfortable with direct confrontation. Some are quite conflict averse. In the culture I work in the US, we were more comfortable with confrontation than some cultures, but we really, especially in our workplaces, really value this sort of smiling, optimism, positivity, connection. Oh, we all see the same, see things the same way. And it feels good. I mean, think about the sort of rush you get when you say something and the room is like nodding along, going, oh my gosh, that's exactly right, Amy. Right. It feels so good. And that I think makes it, the idea of sort of disrupting that harmony or potentially creating a rupture is really scary to us, because of our basic humanness, but also because of what our cultural expectations, and I mean culture, sort of broader culture, but also our organizational culture, right? We we're violating possibly those expectations. And then I think there's a third layer, which is that most of us, if you think of sort of conflict as wandering into this open field of like, I don't know what's going to happen, most of us don't feel confident we know how we're going to navigate out, right? And that's the piece I think many of us are never taught. Like, no one ever sat me down and was like, here's how you have a conflict and here's how you repair from that conflict afterwards, right? Instead, we watch how people handle conflict. I mean, I think about the people I saw screaming at each other over some traffic issue this morning on the street. And I was like, this is right. These are the sort of models. Do you think about our political right environment, especially in the US, but in other places too, right? The way that people model how you handle conflict, it's just high intensity with no resolution, or we get along. It seems to feel black and
Yes.
white.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think then there are these people in our lives that we genuinely believe are impossible to collaborate with or find some agreement with. We say, this person is a jerk or they're really, really difficult to work with. Actually, there's some research that indicates that it's true to a certain extent that one bad apple can really spoil the barrel. Will Phelps, a professor at Rotterdam School of Management in the Netherlands, he designed this simple experiment to see the impact of individuals with negative approach on a team. And actually, by the way, some of these individuals fit the archetypes of difficult co-workers that you share in Getting Along. So anyway, the result of this experiment is that having a bad team member is like having a fast spreading virus. It can infect the rest of the team almost instantaneously. But you emphasize something really important in Getting Along, that the issue isn't so much the individual, but the interaction that we have with them. Tell me
That's
more
right.
about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the bad apple research is interesting. Um, I'm thinking about some research that came out of actually Harvard Business School, where they talk about how they talk about toxic colleagues and how it's so much less costly to avoid hiring one than trying to actually get rid of one, because the influence it has on the team, you not only is it about firing that person, but then it's about undoing the damage they've caused. So, but what you're asking about in terms of how do we separate this person, because so there's a difference between someone who's, let's say, pessimistic, right? And that's one of the archetypes in the book, is the pessimist, versus someone who's like really just constantly putting down ideas, is demeaning to others, right? and all of these things are contagious: positive emotions, negative attitudes. But really, you are not going to change who that person is. And there's lots of research that shows that some people just are naturally pessimistic. That's their outlook on life for whatever reason that is. And you're not going to change that. And I think trying to reform someone who you find challenging is a really daunting task. I don't know many people who are good at it. But what you can try to change is the way you interact. So just because they have a pessimistic attitude doesn't mean you have to tolerate them putting down everyone's ideas. And you can, through your own behavior and perhaps through the behavior of the team, setting team norms, agreeing on how you all are going to interact or handle negativity, you can nudge that person not to be a different person, but to show up differently to the meetings that are there, possibly causing damage. And
Yeah. Such an important point. Coming back to, I think that's truth that we all know, of course, but for some reason often refuse to accept, that we really can't change others. We often struggle to change ourselves. And so I think it's only fair to say that probably changing someone is going to be close to impossible. And it's so much better to focus on our energy and time on changing how we interact with them. So it makes total sense to me. And I wonder, Amy, if you can share a little bit more about how exactly can I do that? What are the things that I need to think about when I have, let's say that I have actually a colleague that is quite demeaning. Let's go to that super difficult scenario. And in the space of culture, we often talk about brilliant jerks. I think it's a good example. So someone with great technical skills, and someone who doesn't even consider that having empathy and thinking about others' needs is part of their job. And so they are just completely inconsiderate of others. If you are faced with this situation at work, what are the strategies or tactics that you can implement to navigate that?
well, I want to answer that. I also want to just touch on briefly this idea that you can't change another person, because it's a bit trite. Like, people always say you can't change another person. Um, but I think that one of the things is, even though we know that, we still try. And that leads me to, right, that leads me to answer your question about the brilliant jerk, which is that really try to be, like, I think in our heads, we think if they could just be better, right? If they could just be less of a jerk, if they could just be less insecure, less arrogant, whatever it is that's bothering you, that's not in your control. And waiting for that to happen, or even trying to make that happen, sometimes makes the situation worse. And so really, I think the first thing you want to think about is, what are the problematic behaviors? Not like what's wrong with this person as an individual, because that list might be long. You might have a lot of things to say, but what are the problematic behaviors, right? Are they demeaning in meetings, right? And trying to be as specific as possible. Are they rude over email? Are they not open to feedback? Are they stuck in their ways and won't hear about a different way of working, right? Whatever those are, focus on those things. Okay, so let's say there's someone who chronically interrupts people in meetings and talks over them. So that's a problematic behavior that you can actually hopefully do something about. And so I think that's the first thing, is really figuring out what are the behaviors. The second is then figure out a goal, because your goal may be to show them that that behavior is unacceptable, but perhaps in their world it is acceptable, right? And so, when I say in their world, I mean maybe from the culture they came from, maybe from the previous work they've done, maybe the family they grew up in, right? I had once had a coaching client who was, the biggest piece of feedback that he got was interrupting, talking over people. And we sort of, as we started to dig into it, he's like, I come from a big family. We talk over it. Like, there's four people talking at the same time all the time. It's just normal to me. I don't know. He didn't even grasp why it was upsetting to others, right? So I think that's the other thing, is figuring out, okay, rather than your goal being to show them that everything's wrong, the goal is to reduce the number of times they interrupt, right? The goal is, and to try to sort of take the judgment out of it. You can describe the effect the interruption has on you, right? It's very hard for me to concentrate. I lose my train of thought. Or if, let's say you can say, I see the team gets totally off track when you're talking over people, whatever it is, you can share the impact it's having without saying it's wrong to interrupt, because they may not believe that. And that's not universally true. I think most of us probably think interrupting is bad, but again, not everyone feels that way. And then you have to sort of just experiment with different tactics. So perhaps you can, if, depending on your relationship with the person, depending on your sort of positional power in the organization, you might have a direct conversation and just say, hey, you know what? One of the things that you're doing, I think that's really holding you back and really harming the team is these interruptions. I don't even know if you know you're doing it. I'm sure it's not your intention, right? That's a key communication there. I'm sure it's not your intention. But what happens is I notice the team gets off track, or I personally lose my train of thought. And I feel like we're not getting to the deeper discussions we need to have when that happens, right? You don't need to get into, I think you're insecure, you're being arrogant because you're trying to prove yourself, all that. You don't need to do that, right? So the direct approach, you might try an indirect approach, which is have a team discussion around how do we want to handle meetings, right? If you're the manager of the team, introduce 3 rules around meetings, right? Team meetings. Maybe we have an agenda ahead of time. We don't interrupt. We allow people to finish their thoughts. If someone does interrupt, we gently nudge them to not, right? And then maybe the third thing is that we do a round robin at the end to make sure all voices were heard. Whatever those norms are, you can use those norms to try to get this sort of interrupter, this brilliant jerk, to participate in a more productive way.
Hi, I'm Maga Bayer, the founder of CultureBrained. If you want more insights on how to cultivate a great company culture, subscribe to this channel. And if you want to learn directly from some of the world-class experts that we have on this channel, I think you should check out the CultureBrained community.